It's the 21st of March, 2021. It's the day after the spring equinox. Days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well are we spending our time? In a winter retreat, we have about 10 days, exactly 10 days, till the end of March. So, winding down. And as we approach the end of the story of the life of the Buddha, then this last week I read the story of Devadatta. There's a lot of teaching stories, a lot of principles highlighted by that tale of Devadatta and trying to take over the Sangha and trying to kill the Buddha. One that struck me was when Devadatta creates a split in the Sangha, and the Buddha says that creating a split in the harmonious Sangha is one of the 5 heinous crimes. So it's with very severe retribution. But then in the next sentence he says, and then one who reunites the division makes some of the heaviest good karma possible. So I think taking that as a contemplation, that anyone who works to reunite divisions is making some good karma. Not just a divided monastic community, but people who have become divided, groups who have become divided and who are disharmonious with each other, then healing those divisions is very difficult to do, but also very good karma if one is able to do it. So dialogue, this word dialogue, or the lost art of dialogue, lost art of conversation. How can we speak to each other, disagree about something, yet speak to each other and not have to end the conversation by saying things like, "That's ridiculous," or "How could you possibly think that?" And that's not a dialogue. But if we say, "Oh, why do you think that?" So this is the giving a hearing. There's this legal term, hearing, I've been contemplating, and everybody's deserving of a hearing. Everybody who requests one gets a hearing in legal terms. So I've been thinking about this term. I never really thought about it much before, but it became somewhat profound for me recently, where just thinking about hearing somebody else, giving somebody else a hearing, giving them your hearing, and hearing what they have to say and considering it, and then they can give you a hearing as well. And then a dialogue can happen between 2 human beings. So ideally, the outcome of a dialogue would be that people with 2 different viewpoints about anything come together, they discuss it, talk about it, speak as to why they believe what they believe, and then at the end of the dialogue, the 2 parties walk away, each with a different view, more refined and profound and better than the view they came in with. So there has to be this openness and willingness to have like a mind that's malleable, willing to consider things, willing to think outside of the box, out of our self-made box. So I can think of times in the monastery where I've been able to have a dialogue with people where we weren't seeing eye to eye together, and both of us walked away each with a different view than we started with, and each of us having considered the other person's side, the other person's viewpoint, and then seeing, oh, that was a valid point. Some of these things, okay, I won't take that on. I still don't agree with that, but some of those things you did have a valid point, and I didn't really see it from that angle before. I didn't really consider it that way. So yeah, I can take that on. So to be open. So this idea of dialogue, and doesn't happen enough. And that's right speech too. So talking about Dhamma, discussing Dhamma. So there might be some sort of doctrinal disagreement, but we don't have to come to division over that, but we can have a dialogue about it and come to a more refined understanding and deepen our understanding, deepen our view. When we consider the Dhamma, there's a few different ways to consider it. One is from taking on Four Noble Truths and Paticcasamuppada and all these different sets of Dhammas. And then another way to consider it, which seems to be more that the Kruba Ajahns tend to consider it, is coming straight to the heart and talking about the simplicity of just daily experience. And then those other sets of Dhammas, Four Noble Truths, 7 Factors of Awakening, etc., they might come into it. But the heart in terms of what has an effect on us. And this can be illustrated by something that popped into my mind today that I had read in a Tibetan text, where it's in a Pabanka Rinpoche talking about respect for Dhamma and respecting Dhamma books, things like little personal standards like not stepping over Dhamma books, always putting Dhamma books in a high place, carrying Dhamma books up high, not just carrying them swinging your arms at the side, and even some thrown away or tossed away or forgotten about text might have some good instruction that's useful for us in the moment. So he found a old piece of paper at a wayside shrine one day, and it was a teaching from the 7th Dalai Lama written on it. And he picked it up. It was just a ragged, torn piece of paper. He picked it up and read it, and it said, "The bee goes from flower to flower, picking up only the nectar. Never have I had a permanent friend." So that's like a heart. That's when I remember something like that, I think of that's like a heart teaching. It was a writing of the 7th Dalai Lama. The bee goes flower to flower, picking up only the nectar. Never have I had a permanent friend. So things like that, so many things can be highlighted, so many Dhammas can be highlighted in a simple statement like that. Or just coming back to the experience of being outside. So as it's coming into springtime, just wonderful time to just be outside and be in the forest. I found sometimes if I'm in my kuti too much, the mind starts to get a bit depressed, and then just getting outside and walking around and not thinking about anything in particular can help to brighten the mind a bit and cheer the mind up a little bit. So putting in a plug for getting out into the forest and walking around. And I've actually been sitting a little bit up at the new Quadplex site, and it's just such a nice spot. Especially today, I was doing some work and some cleaning up there as the construction nears completion, but then from time to time I was just sitting, and I would just stop and rest for a while and just sit, and it's just perfect weather and just the right amount of sun and shade, and it's just a very peaceful spot, very good spot. So we really get that sense with the Buddha. He did give these profound and intricate teachings, but in the end he was also coming straight from the heart, so he was living his life in as pure a way as possible. The arhatship is the very best way to live. Buddhahood is the very best way to live, so he's showing that example. We might think of Sotapanna or arhatship, these very high ideals and very profound attainments talked about in the scriptures, that, okay, well, one day, if I practice my whole life, or maybe multiple more lives, maybe get to one of those. But something that's good to think about is if we do reach the point where, say, stream entry, where Sakkaya Ditthi and doubt and attachment to rites and rituals, Silabbata Paramasa, are relinquished, then that's here and now. That's if those things happen, it will be happening here and now. And if arhatship happens, it'll be happening here and now. That experience will be here and now. It'll be a present moment experience. That's just something to consider, something to think about. That can, I think, help us to bring it back to whatever happens is a present moment experience. And that's not to say that we don't develop all these dhammas and all these wholesome qualities. It's very true that over time, as we hold the sila and we practice day in and day out, and we just go through the ebbs and flows of our life, but with sila, whether it's the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, the 10 precepts, 227 precepts, or more than that even, then day in and day out we follow that, the moods of the mind come and go, and over time, as the sila gets internalized, then there is a deepening that happens over time that comes with experience, and the intuition can grow stronger and more sensitive. So that can happen over time. Yet the development always happens based on having a here and now attitude. And Luang Por Chah talked about this also, where at a certain point he decided that he would just live his life as if it was a day and a night. And then each day just making that same aspiration. Today it's just today, that's it. That's all there is. Yeah. So how do we practice, and how do we abide in a way that we're not just doing the same old thing that we did before we came to the monastery, before we started practicing? Because it's inevitable that when we start practicing, we're just going to be seeking to avoid pain and get more pleasure on a more refined level, and yet that's still the worldly way of thinking. So how do we make it spiritual? How do we make it aloka, the unworldly? That also comes with experience. It's to be expected that for the first year, 5 years, 20 years, we'll be doing that. And that's fine, as long as we're considering what's happening and we're paying attention. But we'll take an example. Say we have a disagreement or an unpleasant experience. Somebody criticizes us. So that's an unpleasant feeling. So then we feel bad, so we want to put a pleasant feeling on top of it to get rid of the unpleasant feeling. So we might say, okay, I'm leaving. And we might leave and then feel a pleasant feeling temporarily. I got away from that person finally. So we might put a pleasant feeling on top of an unpleasant feeling. So we could say that's the worldly way of dealing with feeling, dealing with unpleasantness. Or we might think, all these people aren't taking the practice seriously, and what are they doing here? And so that's like feeling irritated. People aren't taking the practice seriously here, and they're not practicing hard enough. They're not practicing well, but I'm practicing well. And so so taking that thought, well, I'm not doing that, and then that might be pleasant, thinking that. So it's taking that pleasant, well, I'm not doing that. At least I'm okay. So taking that, and that's pleasant to think that, to kind of get puffed up in that way. So taking the pleasant feeling and putting it on top of that unpleasant feeling to get rid of the unpleasant feeling. That's the worldly way of doing it. So take that same situation though, maybe a feeling of irritation. These people aren't taking it seriously. Then reflecting, oh, that's unpleasant, that's suffering. Why is it suffering? It's because I want them to be something other than they are. That's, oh, right. Didn't the Buddha say wanting leads to suffering? Tanha leads to dukkha. So, okay, well that's the Dhamma. So that's the spiritual way. That's the spiritual way to deal with the situation, is to bring it back to dukkha. It's like, oh, that irritation is dukkha, and the dukkha stems directly from me wanting people to be other than what they are. Essentially wanting a situation to be different than what it is in reality. Shouldn't be that way. So there we bring it back to the spiritual, we bring it back to dukkha, rather than, well, at least I'm not doing it and I'm going to go get my samasamadhi on. So when we bring it back to the Four Noble Truths, then that automatically makes it spiritual, because we're reflecting, well, there's that dukkha there again. Yeah. So the interesting part about this is we kind of know to do that intellectually. So we've heard the teachings many, many times. We may have heard many, many Dhamma talks, and we know, like, okay, I should be reflecting on dukkha, reflecting on tanha, craving. So intellectually we know all these things, but the heart doesn't know. So deep down inside, the heart is still deluded. It doesn't know. It really does think that putting a pleasant feeling on top of an unpleasant feeling is really actually the way to happiness. It still thinks that. It doesn't realize, the heart doesn't yet realize that doing that isn't the way to Nibbana. Deep down inside, deep in the heart, the way to Nibbana is the worldly wins. It thinks that. That's how we're operating. So, getting away from the unpleasant, seeking the pleasant, getting away from criticism, seeking praise, and so on. Getting away from loss, seeking gain, getting away from pain, seeking pleasure. Getting away from suffering, seeking happiness. But then we end up seeking it the wrong way. So intellectually we know, well, I shouldn't get irritated, and I shouldn't get angry. I'm practicing meditation. I shouldn't be greedy. Shouldn't get angry. And these things are wrong. The Buddha said they cause dukkha. So intellectually we know that, and we tell ourselves that. And yet the heart still experiences anger, still experiences greed, because it doesn't know. It actually does think deep down inside that that is actually the correct way. So, but it's actually mistaken, and then that's why we need to train it. So there's this word training. It needs to be trained. And then that training happens when we have those real life situations where we actually stop and reflect and consider, oh, that getting irritated because I want these people to be different is dukkha. It's not because they should be different because I think they should be different. Everybody is just who they are, and we are who we are, and wanting it to be otherwise, that's the tanha, that's causing dukkha, that's causing that discontent. And so bringing it back inside, and then that makes it very applicable, makes it very real. That's the whole reason we wear these robes. It's reminding us to do that. Just like, oh yeah, Four Noble Truths, right? We can look at the robes and think, oh yeah, the tanha leads to dukkha. It's happening all the time. Bhava tanha, vibhava tanha, kama tanha, happening all the time. So it doesn't mean we judge ourselves, get really down on ourselves, hard on ourselves. But it means we start to see and consider experience in terms of those three types of tanha, see how that's causing dukkha, and then becomes apparent here and now. There's one sutta where sometimes a monk will take a word and ask the Buddha what it means. So a monk asks the Buddha, apparent here and now, apparent here and now. What does that mean? And the Buddha says, take an example, an angry thought arises, and a monk knows an angry thought has arisen. That's how the Dhamma is apparent here and now. So it's just knowing what is arising and not denying it or repressing it, but knowing it, that's the first step. Knowing what's happening, acknowledging what's happening, giving it a hearing to what's happening. Giving a hearing to ourselves, giving a hearing to the mind. And then the precepts are there as a protection, so we don't act on it. We want to punch someone, we don't actually punch them. We look at that and say, oh, that's that desire to punch that person. That's that desire to tell that person off or whatever. That's that desire to indulge in whatever sensuality might be arising in the mind. So we have the precepts to protect that coarse harm that we might do to ourselves based on those mental states. And it's totally amazing that the Buddha discovered that on his own without anybody telling him that is needed, that the precepts are needed for people in order to really learn. Like Seika, learning. So we spend our life learning in this way, learning about how to use the Four Noble Truths, how to apply them in a way that really hits the heart. Ajahn Sucitto, I think, is using the phrase touching the Dhamma, or that reflection that we are the living Dhamma. The Dhamma is alive, and Panya is something dynamic. It's not a piece of knowledge that we get and then we have it. It's a dynamic letting go. It's where we live with letting go, live with non-attachment here and now. So it's a factor. Panya is like a factor where we have wise reaction or a wise response. Letting go is wise response. So we have a wise response to situations, and then that wise response is, this is dukkha. This is the cause of dukkha. This is the cessation of dukkha, and then seeing that the path helped us to see that. This is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. So the path, the whole Noble Eightfold Path, it helps us to be able to even see these things because they're quite subtle, to make that shift from the worldly into the spiritual. But then when we do that, then however we live our lives, whether we're meditating or going about our duties in the monastery, that reflection can continue to be there. Or if we aren't mindful for a period of time, then when we reestablish our mindfulness later, we can still reflect on it. We can still reflect on that lack of mindfulness and say, oh, that's interesting. Why did that happen? This is the way of the contemplative, the way of the samana, where we're reflecting on our experience and seeing it according to Dhamma. So there's a few interesting stories in the Buddha's life. When he comes to the end, there's, if you'll remember in the beginning of the readings, near the start of after the Buddha's awakening, the first monastery that's offered is the Veluvana, the bamboo grove, the squirrel's sanctuary in Rajagaha. And I'm not sure if this is going to come up in the final readings, but it might. There's also a last monastery offered, and that was offered by the courtesan Ambapali. So that's Ambapali's mango grove, and that's actually near Kusinara, and that was the last monastery offered before the Buddha's parinibbana. And so there's just there's still some interesting stories to look forward to. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta is a really full, rich sutta, and just as the Buddha's in his 80th year and nearing the end of his life, then there's just so many poignant things that come up, how he doesn't pass on governance of the Sangha to anybody, but he says that the Dhamma Vinaya, the Patimokkha, is to be the teacher when he's gone, so he doesn't pass governance on to, say, like some sort of leader after him, although there were leaders and guides after the Buddha, but it wasn't in terms of like a governance per se, but it was governed by, and to the present day, governed by Dhamma Vinaya. So always coming back to the root. So those kind of things are illustrated. But to keep it very simple, we can always just come back to the heart, come back to the Four Noble Truths. That's really the Buddha's legacy. And we can always keep that in our minds. So I'll leave that for reflection this evening.